Technically, you can release games for absolutely $0 if you do everything yourself, or you can spend like over 100K on making your own game, assuming that, hey, you hire a program, you hire artists and things like that. There's a whole broad spectrum of how much can a game cost. But I'm talking more specifically about, the average indie developer. Someone like you, for example, making their first game, their second game, whatever, getting more and more acquainted with game development, but not ready to spend like thousands of dollars on getting everything like custom made, custom art and everything. How much would the game cost you to release it? And that's what I want to answer in this video. One thing I want to just get out of the way first is that I'm not going to be factoring time, because then honestly, like, yeah, every game would cost like tens of thousands of dollars if you were to supposedly pay yourself a supposed wage. I'm assuming you're doing this for the love of the game or as a hobby, either of those, because games often take honestly multiple hundreds of hours and even thousands of hours. Yeah, you're probably not going to be like having a good return on investment on that. I'm talking about purely, okay, how much money am I going to have to drain from my bank account to release this game and to make this game? And whilst, like I said, you can absolutely do everything for free and for $0 and you just have to do it yourself, and basically you're spending time at that point, but we're leaving that like cost out of the equation here. There are three main things that you spend money on, and I want to talk about a few other things. The main ones are your Steam platform fee, your Steam capsule art, and then asset packs. Those are the three big things usually that game developers, when going into like game development, spend money on. Let's dive into the one that honestly I think is the most inevitable, your Steam platform fee. This is basically the $100 that you pay to Steam to have the privilege of putting your game on the Steam store. This has been the same price for over 10 years at this point. Some people say that, hey, it's too cheap. Some people say that it allows for too much slop. I think it's still a pretty fair price. If you earn over $1,000 with your game, you're actually even earning it back. So Steam gives you the $100 back, which is also nice. And technically, you do not have to use Steam. Technically, you could use a platform like itch.io, which is absolutely free to host your game on, and you can have some success. Now, the thing is, whilst you can have some success, and itch.io definitely isn't like a small platform, it still pales in comparison in like user base and things like that compared to Steam. Steam is just so much bigger at the end of the day than platforms like itch.io, which means that there is just more money to be earned on Steam as well. Also, itch.io is more of just a regular marketplace, I would say, and less of a marketing tool, because that's what Steam also at the end of the day is, with things like wishlists, for example, discovery queue and all of that. You're definitely getting some stuff for what you're paying Steam in return. But itch.io does allow you, if you have like a game, usually it's a horror game or an adult-only game, those are the two most common ones that you see on itch.io, put it on there, charge money for it, or have it be completely free and make money that way. But honestly, you should. This is one that I honestly suggest you, if you want to make a like not just a prototype, but actually a start to finish real game experience, you need to get that $100 for Steam. I think that is the one thing that you can't get around. Really, if you want your game to be successful and you want to have it reach as many people as possible, you have to put it on Steam. And this leads me to the second thing, basically, that is often going to cost you the most, and that's also, I think, kind of because of our audience being mainly programmers, is the fact that, hey, you may have an ugly game. And that's fine, but the one thing where you can't have like ugly art is for your Steam capsule. This is basically the thumbnail images that you see when browsing Steam of all of the different games. And it's the first time that people often will see you and your game, and they have a choice. Do they actually want to click through whatever like the capsule is, like the art that they see of your game? Does it encapsulate the vibe of a game that they think they would be interested in? Or are they gonna keep scrolling and never look at your game in further depth? So that is why a lot of developers, they do put about $100 to $300, maybe $400 into getting professionally made capsule art. You can, of course, do it yourself. The problem is, you are not a graphic designer, most likely. If you are an actual artist, by all means, you do not need to spend money on this. You can get away with doing it yourself, but if you are not very, very confident in your art skills, and I'm talking about you need to be actually honest with yourself, and you need to be, I would not just say good, but I would say great or even exceptional, then it's worth it to spend more money on like getting someone from Fiverr, for example, to make capsule art for you. We've had good experiences with it. A lot of people in our community have good experiences with it. Sure, it's gonna sting a little bit because you're paying that much money for a single image. Wow, that's crazy, bro. But it is going to be worth it, in my opinion. If you're not sure, where can you find good capsule artists? Because that is something that we struggled with as well. There's a link down below actually, because we've made like a compilation of capsule artists that we've personally worked with, that other people in our community have worked with, and like their experiences, how much did they pay, their like actual work that they've delivered. I think that is a really good resource that you can take a look at down below, like I said as well, in finding good capsule artists. Now, you couldn't technically make this yourself, like I said, but I really wouldn't suggest it. We did it for Unicycle Pizza Time, but the reason for that was also more of a time consideration and the fact that I do think I have a pretty decent understanding already of how does Photoshop work, how does Steam work. It wasn't my first rodeo, shall we say. So I think that was one reason I could kind of get away with it, but for most games, honestly, I am still a bigger fan of making the capsule art yourself. And of course, yeah, this is something we've talked about before. You can technically do things like AI art as well. Once again, you have that problem of, do you actually understand composition? Do you understand what to draw, what to put on your capsule art? Maybe, probably not though, in which case I do still think it's always going to be a better approach to not try and figure things out all by yourself and having a crappy capsule art, because my God, I've seen a lot of those as well, but actually just spend a bit of money and you're going to get a good result. So now we've already burned through $100 for the Steam page and let's say $200 for the capsule. Now, what is the final big thing that people pay money for? This is kind of a broad one and you can maybe spend $50 on it or you can spend $1,000 on it if you want. That is assets. Chances are that, hey, you are not a professional programmer or artist, or mainly both of them at the same time. That just honestly doesn't really exist, because it's two different things that you need to specialize in. And also, even if you were specializing in both of them, well, there's only so much time you have in a day, and maybe you do want to release your game before you're retired. In which case, asset packs are probably the most common thing that people buy. You can buy assets that are full-on code frameworks for your engines, like for example, like city builder templates or horror game templates and things like that. Or you can buy assets that is more of the things like icons or 3D art and things like that, because you realize that, hey, I'm not a good 3D artist, or it just takes too much time, and you accept that, hey, my first game, it's not going to be 100% bespoke. Every piece of art is made by me, myself, because that is just not going to be worth it. I'm also assuming that you don't have an actual 3D artist on the team. And even if you do, you probably will end up with some assets at some point, because, hey, things like music also. Why would you learn composing all the music by yourself when you could also spend like honestly $30 sometimes for a humble bundle or whatever, or other assets that contain hundreds of songs that you can use without restriction in your game? It's just a better value proposition there than trying to make everything yourself. This is something, like I said, I can't give an exact number on it. It depends on you. I think a big trap here though that I do want to warn you about is sometimes you have platforms like Humble Bundle or the Unity Asset Store, like Black Friday sales, for example. It can be very tempting to overbuy, basically, where this is something we've definitely done as well. We've spent like hundreds of dollars on assets only to then scrap the game that we were working on. That is the one warning thing that I would warn you against. Don't go buck wild on just buying assets. There is like this balance where you don't want to be too stingy. That was another thing we did, where we were like, oh, we can make our own localization system. And it took so long for us to make it, and it was way less intuitive, versus we could just spend the 40 euros on I2 localize, 20 euros in sale or something. We earned that time back, basically. It was a really good time investment because we got localization set up in like 1 hour versus having to spend 20 plus hours trying to write our own localization library from scratch. That is one thing. The problem is, you see this often with like 3D model assets, for example. Shout out to Cinti with all of their different packs. And it's like, oh, actually, Fantasy Kingdom, I think I can use that in my game. And you buy it and it's like $150 on sale or something. And then turns out, hey, the game you were working on didn't really fit after all, and you kind of canceled it. And now you have this asset that you did pay money for, but you're not getting your money back from it. So try to be very focused with how many assets you get for your project, basically. I've made videos before about like how many assets should you use. I honestly, like ballpark, you want to have like only a few ideally of like your core assets. So think of like your 3D models, for example. I think Unicycle Pizza Time was made with a single, like the unicycle asset. And then we had, of course, our music. And then we had the environment was basically one paid asset and then all of the free PBR assets we could find on the Unity Asset Store. And that's it. Don't go buck wild on a sale and be like, I'm gonna buy all of the assets and I'll see if I can use them in the future. I wouldn't suggest doing that because then, yeah, it's going to get very costly very quickly. Now, there are some other things that you can be spending money on, and the first one is things like, for example, licenses for the pieces of software you use to make games. So for example, could be something like, hey, a Photoshop subscription, or buying the like one-time purchase Affinity Photo. Could be things like paying for IDEs like Writer, for example. In our cases, we often think like, hey, this is worth it. For you, it depends on you. It depends on the style of game you're making. You can compile a sprite from scratch for free, or you can pay like 20 bucks for it and buy the pre-compiled version. It depends on how much do you value your time and skill. Once again, that's another thing to keep in mind. But this is something that definitely you can go very crazy in it and be like, oh, I need a Substance Painter subscription or whatever. Or you can be like, hey, actually, I'm gonna try and use open source tools. I'm gonna use free tools. We made a video with like some of the free tools that we used for game dev as well. It's kind of an old one, but I think there's some good stuff in there as well that you can look into and learn that way, basically. Another kind of cost that you often see that honestly I really don't suggest you to do at all is marketing costs. There are three main things here. The first one is going to events. Like for example, spending a few $1,000s on going to an event like Gamescom to showcase your game, or like we've done other events as well that are like smaller, more local ones. These are generally never worth it. And they can cost between, like I said, yeah, thousands of dollars. Like Gamescom can go up to like 10K for like their small booths, because you need to keep in mind that, hey, you need to go there for 5 days, you need to get hotels, you need to actually pay for the booth itself. It gets very expensive very quickly. We've done smaller events where you can do like, oh, you pay $100, sometimes even you just go for free. Even then, maybe if it's for free, you can do it once, but afterwards you'll realize that you probably don't want to do it again. Spending money from it is never really going to be a good return on investment, like wishlist wise and things like that, because you're paying money and you have that problem of only so many people can physically come by your booth in a day, whereas going online and creating content, getting influencers to play your game is going to be a much better kind of scale, because a single influencer who isn't even that big can get like 10,000 views on a certain video, whereas the total attendance for that event may have been only 5,000 people, and not everyone actually even came to your booth. So that is something to consider. Speaking of those influencers, what you can also do, but that I also don't suggest, is paid integrations. So instead of just sending them an email with a Steam key and be like, hey, it would be nice if you could play this, send them an email with the Steam key and be like, hey, I will pay you. Generally it starts at about $1,000, $2,000, and it goes up pretty steeply depending on how big the content creator is, to pay them to have guaranteed coverage for like 1 hour usually of your game. This is not really worth it. There's like some numbers done from it from some other games. I'll link it down below or something. Not always worth that much, like the impact and like the wish list you gain for the dollars you spend, basically. So I also wouldn't suggest that. And then the third thing is advertising, either through like Facebook or Reddit or X, the Everything app. Also, once again, return on investment usually isn't there. You're generally paying $5 to $10 per wishlist, which you are never really recouping. You're just throwing money in the void, and yeah, you'll get a little bit back normally, but it's not gonna be worth it. And then the final thing that you can also spend a lot of money on, honestly, is localization. Generally, prices for this range between 3 cents to $12 per word, which sounds low. I don't know if it sounds low, honestly. It's kind of high still, I think, especially if you're making games that have a lot of text, like a lot of narrative and things like that. It can get very expensive very quickly and not always be worth it. I think my suggestion here is to just localize your store pages, say that your game is going to have language support like before the game comes out, and then see what is the impact. Do people actually care about this game in Korea or whatever, and is it worth it to go and localize the game? If you don't really see a noticeable like share in that country of like interest in your game through wishlists and things like that, then it's probably not going to be worth to spend the time and money on localizing the game. I also asked you guys, of course, how much have you been spending, and it seems like the general conclusion is like between $300 and like $600, $700. That's also kind of what we've spent in total on our games, like between $300 and $800, I think. I think that's a good balance for buying the assets, buying the art, and like getting maybe like a few custom pieces commissioned, but nothing crazy really. I think for the most part, yes, stick to assets, stick to your own time to a certain degree. And if something is taking too long, that is the point that you can be like, actually, fuck it, this is not worth me learning another 4 weeks of Blender or whatever. I'm just gonna buy this asset pack for 30 euros and I'm gonna move on with my life. That is definitely something that I do still suggest you doing at some point. Now, one final thing that may be a good return on investment as well, obviously, is to go to the link down below to our Patreon, because we upload extra super in-depth videos talking about more of the advanced stuff of game development, going way more in depth into things like, hey, what do you do after release? How do you do your capsules and things like that? There's some really good in-depth videos on there. For just 10 euros a month, you can get access to all of that. And if it turns out you don't like it, well, just contact me and I'll give you a refund anyway. But honestly, I think it's really good. There's a lot of other people on the platform already who do think that they are getting immense value out of it. So I would suggest that you at least give it a go and check it out. That's all I really have to say. Leave a comment down below. How much money have you spent already on your game? And how much of that do you think you'll ever see like recouped? I'm very curious about you. I just want to wallow in your misery alongside as well. Because sometimes I see people and they're like, oh yeah, I spent $7,000 on my game and I made 500. And it's like, ooh, that hurts. Lucky that's not me. So I'm very curious about you. Leave a comment down below. And apart from that, if you're new here, we make 2 videos every week talking about game development and the things that we've been learning along the way. If that's something that interests you, be sure to head down below and subscribe, as it really helps us out. It makes me happy because the number goes up and you get these videos delivered to your subscription box the moment they come out. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!